Jasmine Williams freezes as her hijab is violently yanked from her head at 30,000 feet. Passengers' gasps filling the cabin. The white flight attendant's smirk vanishes when Jasmine's phone rings, her father's name flashing on screen. Dad, Airline CEO. Tomorrow's headlines would shock America, but not for reasons anyone aboard could imagine. Before I dive into this unbelievable story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button right now if you've ever witnessed discrimination on public transport, and subscribe to join our community fighting for justice. Ready to discover how a simple flight turned into a national awakening? Let's go. Jasmine Williams was not your average 19-year-old college sophomore. With perfect grades at Howard University's prestigious aeronautical engineering program, she carried herself with quiet confidence that some mistook for shyness. What none of her classmates knew was that her father, Solomon Williams, was the founder and CEO of Airline, America's fastest-growing airline worth billions. "I want to earn my way," she had insisted to her father when choosing Howard over the Ivy League schools that had courted her. "How can I eventually lead a company serving everyday Americans if I'm isolated in privilege?" Solomon, a self-made success who had worked his way up from baggage handler to airline owner, understood her reasoning but worried constantly. "The world isn't always kind to young black women making their own path," he had warned, remembering his own struggles in the industry. Jasmine's decision to wear a hijab had come 6 months ago after reconnecting with her maternal Senegalese roots. Her mother Amina, who had passed away when Jasmine was 12, had raised her with appreciation for their Muslim heritage without strict religious practices. During a summer research project on Islamic contributions to mathematics and astronomy, Jasmine felt a profound connection to this part of her identity. "Your mother would be proud," Solomon had said when she first wore the hijab home, his eyes misty. Though not religious himself, he respected his daughter's journey. What worried him were the news reports of increasing hostility toward visibly Muslim passengers on flights. That spring break morning, Jasmine packed methodically in her modest off-campus apartment. Her roommate Zoe looked up from her laptop with concern. "You're seriously flying commercial? And on Airline? Your dad would send the private jet if you asked." Jasmine carefully folded her spare hijab into her carry-on. "That's exactly why I need to fly like everyone else. Dad's been getting reports about discriminatory treatment, but the executive team keeps dismissing them as isolated incidents. I need to see for myself." Zoe frowned, turning her laptop to show a viral video of a Somali woman being removed from a flight. "3 incidents. This month already. Promise me you'll be careful." "I'm just gathering information," Jasmine assured her, though her stomach tightened at the video. "Besides, it's Airline. Dad would never allow systematic discrimination." What Jasmine didn't share was her growing suspicion that her father might be insulated from the reality of passenger experiences. The executive floor of Airline headquarters was predominantly white, despite Solomon's own background. How much was he missing? "I've got my project data to review anyway," she said, patting her journal where she documented passenger service observations. For months, she'd been flying different airlines, recording treatment patterns among diverse passengers. The data showed disturbing trends, but she needed more evidence before presenting it to her father. "Text me when you land," Zoe insisted, hugging her goodbye. As Jasmine wheeled her suitcase toward the door, she hesitated, then removed her university ID from around her neck and tucked it deep into her bag. Today, she wasn't Solomon Williams's daughter or a Howard engineering student. She was just another passenger, exactly the perspective she needed. What she couldn't know was how this decision would change not just her spring break plans, but the entire airline industry. Baltimore-Washington International Airport buzzed with spring break travelers. Jasmine approached the Airline check-in counter, observing how the agent's smile tightened slightly when she stepped forward. The woman's eyes lingered on her hijab before checking her ticket. "Miss Williams, you've been randomly selected for additional security screening," the agent announced loudly, causing nearby passengers to glance over. Jasmine nodded politely, noting in her mental log that this was the 4th consecutive flight where she'd been randomly selected. As an engineering student, She understood probability well enough to know these odds were statistically impossible without bias. At the security checkpoint, she was directed to a separate line. The TSA agent waved a wand over her hijab. "We'll need to do a private screening," he stated flatly. "Is that standard procedure for all head coverings?" Jasmine asked, her voice even. The agent's face hardened. "It's procedure for security risks." 20 minutes later, after a thorough search, found nothing. Jasmine hurried to her gate where boarding had already begun. She noticed the gate agent wave through several passengers ahead of her without checking IDs, but stopped her for verification, scrutinizing her passport photo where she wasn't wearing a hijab. "This doesn't look like you," the agent said suspiciously. "The photo was taken 2 years ago before I began wearing hijab," Jasmine explained calmly, used to this interaction. Eventually allowed to board, she made her way down the aisle to seat 14C. A middle-aged white woman in 14B visibly stiffened as Jasmine approached, clutching her purse tighter and avoiding eye contact. Flight attendant Rebecca Whitley, a tall woman with immaculate blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, watched Jasmine from the galley. In her 15 years at Airline, Rebecca had earned a reputation for exceptional service to certain passengers. Her personnel file contained 5 commendations for first-class service and 3 buried complaints from minority passengers that never made it past middle management. As Jasmine stored her carry-on, Rebecca approached the row. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass again?" she asked sharply. Jasmine provided it without comment, noting that no other passengers around her were being rechecked. "Everything seems to be in order," Rebecca said with obvious disappointment, before turning to the white passenger beside Jasmine. "Can I get you a pre-flight beverage, ma'am?" She didn't extend the offer to Jasmine. Across the aisle, an elderly, black woman with silver-rimmed glasses observed the interaction with narrowed eyes. "Excuse me," she called to Rebecca. "I'd like a water, and I'm sure my neighbor would too." She nodded toward Jasmine with a warm smile. "I'm Gloria, honey. First time on Airline?" "Thank you. And yes, first time," Jasmine replied, careful not to reveal her connection. Rebecca returned with one water, placing it before Gloria while ignoring Jasmine's presence. As she turned away, she accidentally bumped Jasmine's arm, spilling a few drops on her sleeve. "Oh, so sorry," Rebecca said without sincerity. "Turbulence." "We're still at the gate," Jasmine pointed out quietly. Gloria shook her head disapprovingly as Rebecca walked away. "Some things never change. Been flying 50 years and still seeing the same behavior, just more subtle now." As the flight prepared for takeoff, a tall black man in an airline uniform made his way to a seat in the back. He nodded professionally to Rebecca, who gave a curt response. Jasmine recognized the 4 stripes on his shoulder. A captain, but riding as a passenger today. Midway through the safety demonstration, Rebecca paused near Jasmine's row, staring pointedly at her seatbelt. "All passengers must comply with safety regulations," she announced loudly, despite Jasmine already being properly buckled. The takeoff was smooth, but 20 minutes into the flight, the captain announced turbulence ahead and requested all passengers to return to their seats. As the plane began to shake, Rebecca made her way through the cabin checking seatbelts. When she reached Jasmine, she leaned in unnecessarily close. "We've received some security concerns," she whispered, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Just keeping an eye on things." Jasmine felt her heart rate increase, but kept her expression neutral. From her engineering courses on aircraft design, she knew the turbulence was merely routine clear air disturbance. The security concerns comment was clearly meant to create suspicion. 2 rows behind, the off-duty captain frowned as he observed the interaction. Tyrone Jackson had flown for Airline for 12 years and recognized the subtle discrimination tactics some crews still employed. He'd seen Rebecca at company events and knew her reputation for exemplary service was selective at best. When Rebecca returned to the galley, Tyrone watched her huddle with another flight attendant, both glancing repeatedly in Jasmine's direction. Through the curtain, Jasmine could hear fragments of their conversation. "New memo about suspicious passengers. Keeping an eye on her. Called the cockpit already." Jasmine discreetly removed her journal, beginning to document the interactions. This was exactly the kind of evidence she needed. Not isolated incidents, but a pattern of behavior, targeting passengers like her. As she wrote, she recalled similar scenes she'd witnessed on other flights. A Sikh man questioned about his turban, a Latino family separated during boarding for random checks, an Arabic-speaking businessman whose every trip to the lavatory was monitored. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, Jasmine noticed Rebecca watching her closely, whispering into the aircraft phone. Whatever flight this was supposed to be, it had already become something else entirely. A documentation of discriminatory practices her father needed to see. What Jasmine couldn't know was how much worse things would get before they landed. 2 hours into the flight, most passengers had settled into the rhythm of travel. Some watched movies on seatback screens, others dozed beneath thin airline blankets. Jasmine continued making notes in her journal, documenting every interaction, with meticulous engineer's precision. Rebecca, returning from serving first-class meals, stopped abruptly beside Jasmine's row. "What are you writing?" she demanded, her voice carrying above the engine noise. Passengers nearby looked up, conversations pausing as attention shifted to their row. "Just my personal journal," Jasmine answered calmly, though her pulse quickened. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "I've noticed you writing extensively, making observations of the aircraft and crew. Several passengers have expressed concerns." This was a fabrication. No one had approached Rebecca, but the statement accomplished its goal. Nearby passengers began watching Jasmine with new suspicion. "May I see what you're writing?" Rebecca extended her hand expectantly. "I'm sorry, but this contains personal thoughts." "I'm not obligated to share private writings," Jasmine replied, knowing her rights as a passenger. Rebecca's face hardened. "When safety concerns are raised, we have protocols to follow. I need to examine any suspicious materials." "What specific safety concern could a journal possibly present?" Jasmine asked. Instead of answering, Rebecca raised her voice further. "Attention passengers, we have a security situation that requires your cooperation. Please remain calm." The cabin instantly tensed. In post-9/11 America, few phrases triggered more immediate anxiety than security situation on an aircraft. "This is completely unnecessary," Jasmine protested, as Rebecca signaled to another flight attendant to bring the drink cart, effectively blocking the aisle and trapping Jasmine in her row. "We need to inspect your belongings," Rebecca announced, now addressing both Jasmine and the surrounding passengers who had become an unwilling audience. Flight safety protocols. Gloria, the elderly woman across the aisle, spoke up. "Young lady hasn't done anything but write in her notebook. Since when is that suspicious?" Rebecca ignored her. "We've received multiple reports of suspicious behavior. As senior flight attendant, it's my responsibility to investigate." "What behavior specifically?" Jasmine challenged, maintaining her composure despite the growing spectacle. "Writing in code, monitoring crew movements, possible communications with outside parties," Rebecca listed vaguely. "Please open your bag for inspection. Has something like this ever happened to you or someone you know? Comment number 1 if you believe this flight attendant is following proper procedure, or number 2 if you think this is clear discrimination. Don't forget to like this video if you want to see justice served in situations like these." Now, what do you think happens when someone tries to stand up to this kind of treatment at 30,000 feet? Let's continue. The off-duty Captain Tyrone, who had been observing from 2 rows back, stood up. "Excuse me, I'm Captain Jackson. Perhaps we can resolve this privately rather than disrupting the entire cabin." Rebecca's expression flickered, with recognition before hardening again. "Captain, with all due respect, I'm the senior crew member on duty. Please return to your seat." "I'd like to see the specific security protocol you're following," he pressed. "That's confidential crew information," Rebecca responded sharply. "Sir, interfering with flight crew duties is a federal offense. Please sit down." Reluctantly, Tyrone returned to his seat, but kept his attention focused on the unfolding scene. By now, the confrontation had drawn the attention of the entire economy cabin. Jasmine, feeling dozens of eyes on her, tried to defuse the situation. I'm happy to answer any specific questions about my writing, but my journal contains personal thoughts I'm not required to share. In that case, Rebecca, said, reaching for the phone at her station. We may need to divert the aircraft for security personnel to meet us. A murmur of annoyance rippled through the cabin. A diversion meant missed connections, delays, and hassle for everyone. This is ridiculous, a businessman called out. Just show her the notebook so we can get on with the flight. Others joined in, pressure mounting from passengers whose priority was now their own convenience rather than Jasmine's rights. She's probably hiding something, a woman whispered loudly enough to be heard several rows away. Jasmine felt the collective mood shifting against her. What had begun as a discriminatory action by one crew member was evolving into mob mentality. When Jasmine reached for her phone to call her father, Rebecca immediately intervened. No electronic communications during a security procedure, she declared, confiscating the phone despite having no authority to do so. That's my private property, Jasmine protested. It will be returned after we land and security personnel clear you, Rebecca stated. She turned to address the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, as a precaution, please report any suspicious behavior you may have observed from this passenger. The public invitation to scrutinize her actions sent a chill through Jasmine. Several passengers began whispering, pointing, constructing suspicious narratives from innocent actions. She was in the bathroom for a long time, one offered. I saw her watching the flight attendants, added another. With each comment, Rebecca nodded as if collecting evidence, though none described anything remotely threatening. A Middle Eastern man several rows ahead slumped in his seat, avoiding eye contact, clearly fearful of becoming the next target. A woman in a Sikh turban pretended to sleep, also trying to become invisible. Jasmine observed their reactions, understanding their fear. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every passenger who didn't fit Rebecca's profile of who belonged in the skies. If you won't cooperate, Rebecca finally announced, we'll need to secure you until landing for the safety of all passengers. The implication was clear: comply or be restrained. Jasmine sat perfectly still, dignity intact despite the humiliation. I have complied with every legitimate request. I've broken no rules or laws. What you're doing is discriminatory profiling, and I will not participate in validating it. Rebecca's face flushed with anger at being directly challenged. Your headscarf, she said, voice dropping to a dangerous tone. We need to verify your identity matches your travel documents. The cabin grew eerily quiet as passengers realized a line was about to be crossed. Excuse me? Jasmine's voice was barely audible over the engine noise. Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she leaned closer. Your head covering. It needs to be removed for proper identification. It could be concealing prohibited items. This is a hijab, Jasmine explained, maintaining remarkable composure. It's a religious head covering. TSA protocols specifically address this. Verification can be done privately by female security staff if necessary, not in public by flight attendants. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the confrontation had moved beyond standard procedure into something more troubling. We're at 30,000 feet, Rebecca countered. Standard airport protocols don't apply during in-flight security situations. I need to verify your identity matches your ID photo, which shows you without head covering. My identity has already been verified multiple times at check-in, security, and boarding, Jasmine pointed out. This request is both redundant and inappropriate. Rebecca's posture stiffened. This isn't a request. Flight crew instructions are mandatory under federal aviation regulations. Gloria spoke up again from across the aisle. Young lady has religious freedom rights. You can't just demand she remove her hijab. Interfering with crew member duties is also against federal regulations, Rebecca shot back, clearly enjoying the power of invoking federal authority. Tyrone Jackson stood again. As an Airline captain, I'm familiar with our security protocols. There's nothing in our procedures requiring removal of religious garments in flight. Rebecca's face reddened. Captain Jackson, this is the third time you've disrupted my duties. I'll be filing a report. I look forward to reading it alongside my own, he responded evenly. The standoff continued, tension building throughout the cabin. Some passengers began recording on phones, sensing they were witnessing something significant. "Last chance to comply voluntarily," Rebecca warned Jasmine, her patience visibly evaporating. Jasmine sat straighter. "I respectfully decline to remove my hijab. I am exercising my religious freedom rights while complying with all legitimate security requirements." What happened next occurred so quickly that passengers would later give conflicting accounts to investigators. Rebecca reached forward, her hand grasping the edge of Jasmine's hijab. There was a brief tug of war as Jasmine instinctively raised her hands to protect her covering. "Let go," Rebecca demanded. "You have no right," Jasmine responded. Then came the sound of fabric tearing as Rebecca yanked forcefully, pulling the hijab from Jasmine's head in one violent motion. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. Several phones recorded the moment, their owners torn between horror and the modern instinct to document. Jasmine sat exposed, her hair tumbling down around her shoulders. For a moment, the cabin was utterly silent, except for the steady hum of the engines. Rebecca stood holding the hijab, momentary triumph in her eyes, giving way to uncertainty as she registered the shocked faces around her. She had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. Jasmine, rather than cowering or crying as Rebecca might have expected, slowly reached into her bag and withdrew a spare hijab. With deliberate dignity, she wrapped it around her head, her movements precise despite slightly trembling hands. "My name," she said, her voice cutting through the silence with unexpected authority, "is Jasmine Williams. I am the daughter of Solomon Williams, founder and CEO of Airlines." Rebecca's face went blank, then skeptical. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Check the passenger manifest," Tyrone suggested from behind them. "Or better yet, let her make that phone call now." "This is obviously a desperate attempt to avoid consequences," Rebecca scoffed, though a flicker of doubt crossed her features. "I've seen Ms. Williams at company functions," Tyrone added. "She is exactly who she claims to be." Rebecca hesitated, then doubled down. "Even if that were true, which I doubt, security protocols apply to everyone." A flight attendant appeared, at Rebecca's side, whispering urgently. Rebecca's face paled slightly, but she shook her head. "For continued non-compliance and potential threat to flight safety," she announced, "we'll need to restrain the passenger until landing." She produced plastic restraints from her pocket, the type kept on aircraft for truly dangerous situations, involving violent or incapacitated passengers. Gloria stood up despite the seatbelt sign. "You put those on that child, you'll have to put them on me too." "Ma'am, return to your seat immediately," Rebecca ordered. "I've flown this airline since, before you were born," Gloria replied. "I know Solomon Williams personally from the early days when he started this company promising dignity for all passengers. If he saw this disgrace, he'd fire you on the spot." Rebecca wavered, visibly calculating her options. The situation had spiraled beyond her control, with too many witnesses and too much documentation. "Fine," she finally said. "One phone call to verify identity, then we proceed according to results." She reluctantly handed Jasmine her phone back. "Speaker mode only, no texting or other communications." Jasmine took the phone with steady hands and dialed a number from memory. The cabin fell silent as it rang once, twice, 3 times. "Williams speaking," came a deep voice through the speaker. "Dad," Jasmine said, her composure finally cracking slightly. "I need your help." "Jasmine?" Solomon Williams's voice sharpened with concern. "What's wrong?" "I'm on Airline Flight 1857 to Atlanta," she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "There's been an incident." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably as dozens of eyes turned to her. The public nature of the speakerphone call was not what she had anticipated. "A flight attendant has been profiling me since boarding," Jasmine continued. "It escalated to the point where she physically removed my hijab against my will, in front of the entire cabin." There was a moment of stunned silence on the line. "She did what?" Solomon's voice thundered through the speaker, causing several passengers to flinch. The authority in his tone was unmistakable, This was indeed someone accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed. "Who is the flight attendant?" he demanded. Rebecca stepped forward, attempting to regain control. "Sir, this is Senior Flight Attendant Rebecca Whitley. There's been a misunderstanding." "Ms. Whitley," Solomon interrupted, his voice dangerously calm. "Is my daughter correct that you forcibly removed her hijab?" Rebecca hesitated. "Sir, we had security concerns." "Yes or no, Ms. Whitley?" The cabin remained silent, passengers collectively holding their breath. "Yes, but protocols." "Put the captain on immediately," Solomon ordered. "He's in the cockpit and can't be disturbed during—" "I'm the CEO of this airline, Ms. Whitley. Put the captain on." The second flight attendant, who had been hovering nearby, whispered something to Rebecca, who reluctantly handed her the phone. "I'll take this to the cockpit," the younger woman said, clearly relieved to escape the tension in the cabin. As she disappeared behind the cockpit door, Rebecca stood awkwardly in the aisle, her authority evaporating by the second. Passengers who had previously been influenced by her security theater now looked at her with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. "You've worked for Airline 15 years, haven't you?" Tyrone asked, filling the uncomfortable silence. Rebecca nodded stiffly. "Long enough to have seen Mr. Williams at company events. Didn't you recognize his daughter?" "I've never seen her at events," Rebecca muttered. "Because she doesn't use her privilege," Tyrone explained. "Unlike some who abuse their authority." 3 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. The captain emerged, his face grave as he surveyed the scene. He approached Jasmine first. "Ms. Williams, on behalf of the flight crew and Airline Airlines, I want to express my deepest apologies for what you've experienced today. I've spoken with your father, who has arranged for executive team members to meet us at the gate." He turned to Rebecca. "Ms. Whitley, you're relieved of duties for the remainder of this flight. Please take seat 2A in first class and remain there until we land." Rebecca's face flushed. "Captain, with all due respect, that's a direct order, Ms. Whitley. Seat 2A, now." As Rebecca made her way forward, visibly shaken, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed. Passengers who had been intimidated into silence now spoke freely, some approaching Jasmine to offer support. "I recorded everything," a college student told her, displaying a video on his phone. "It's already got 5,000 views on TikTok." Jasmine nodded, overwhelmed by the rapid shift in dynamics. Her original plan to quietly document discrimination had exploded into a public incident that would soon reach millions. The captain knelt beside her seat. "Ms. Williams, would you be more comfortable in first class for the remainder of the flight?" Jasmine shook her head. "No thank you, Captain. I'm fine right here." She glanced at Gloria across the aisle. "I have good company." The captain nodded respectfully. "The remaining crew has been instructed to ensure your comfort. Please let us know if you need anything at all." As he returned to the cockpit, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Executive team and PR on standby at gate. Legal team reviewing options, are you okay?" She typed back, "I'm fine, but this isn't about me, Dad. This is happening to people every day who don't have a CEO father to call." Gloria reached across the aisle to pat Jasmine's hand. "You handled that with incredible grace, child." "I had good role models," Jasmine replied, thinking of her mother's quiet strength and her father's dignified persistence in building his company against all odds. For the remainder of the flight, the atmosphere was transformed. Flight attendants who had previously ignored Jasmine now checked on her frequently, offering premium services typically reserved for first class. Passengers who had been suspicious now approached to apologize for not speaking up sooner. The young man who had uploaded the video returned from checking his phone in the lavatory. "Ma'am, your story is going viral. Major news networks are picking it up." Airline discrimination is trending. Jasmine absorbed this information thoughtfully. The public exposure would force her father's company to address not just this incident, but the systemic issues behind it. There would be no quietly burying this complaint. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Jasmine stared out the window at the sprawling city below. What had begun as a fact-finding mission had become something far larger. A very public reckoning that would force not just Airline, but the entire industry to confront its treatment of minority passengers. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into Atlanta. Local time is 3:45 p.m. with clear skies and 75 degrees. On behalf of the entire Airline team, I want to personally apologize for the disruption during today's flight. Our commitment to respectful treatment of all passengers is absolute, and we failed to uphold that standard today." The unprecedented public apology from the captain confirmed what everyone already sensed. This flight had become a pivotal moment that would have repercussions far beyond the aircraft. As the plane touched down on the runway, Jasmine closed her journal, having documented every detail of the experience. What she couldn't write down was what would happen next, how this single flight would transform not just her spring break, but potentially the entire airline industry's approach to discrimination. The aircraft taxied toward the gate with unusual slowness, as if the captain were deliberately postponing the inevitable storm awaiting them. Through the windows, Jasmine could see what the other passengers soon noticed. This was not a typical arrival. News vans lined the perimeter of the terminal. Airport police and airline officials in suits stood clustered near the jet bridge. And front and center, impossible to miss, was Solomon Williams himself, a commanding figure in an impeccable suit, his face set in the stern expression that had earned him the nickname, the Judge, among airline executives. "Is that really your dad?" the college student who'd uploaded the video whispered to Jasmine. She nodded, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. She had never intended to use her father's position this way, had spent years deliberately avoiding special treatment. Yet now his presence represented not privilege, but protection. Not just for her, but potentially for countless others who had faced similar discrimination without recourse. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special arrival procedure today. Please remain seated until announced. Those needing to make connections will be given priority assistance by ground staff." Jasmine noticed Rebecca Whitley in first class, visibly agitated as she gathered her belongings, clearly intending to be first off the plane. The cabin door opened, and 2 airport police officers stepped aboard, followed by a woman in an Airline executive uniform. She spoke briefly with the lead flight attendant, who pointed toward first class. The officers proceeded directly to Rebecca's seat. "Ms. Whitley, please come with us," one said quietly. "Am I being detained?" Rebecca asked loudly, drawing attention. "No, ma'am. We're escorting you to a private debriefing. Please come voluntarily." Rebecca stood, clutching her purse tightly. "This is outrageous. I was following security protocols." "That will be determined in the review," the officer replied evenly. "This way, please." As Rebecca was escorted past Jasmine's row, their eyes met briefly. In Rebecca's expression, Jasmine saw not remorse, but indignation, the look of someone who still believed herself the victim rather than the aggressor. Once Rebecca was off the plane, passengers were finally permitted to deplane. As Jasmine emerged into the jet bridge, Solomon Williams stepped forward, enveloping his daughter in a tight embrace. "Are you all right?" he whispered. "I'm fine, Dad," she assured him, aware of the cameras capturing their reunion. Solomon turned to Gloria, who had followed Jasmine off the plane. "Thank you for supporting my daughter," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "I've been flying your airline since you had just 2 planes," Gloria replied. "Never thought I'd see the day when an Airline crew member would behave like that." Solomon's expression darkened. "Neither did I." An Airline executive approached, deferentially. "Mr. Williams, we have a private room ready for a debrief and press statement preparation." "In a moment," he replied, turning to address the deplaning passengers who had slowed to watch the scene. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. Everyone will receive full refunds and additional compensation for the disruption." Most passengers nodded appreciatively, some stopping to express support to Jasmine. Tyrone Jackson, the off-duty captain, approached last. "Ms. Williams, If you need a statement from me about what I witnessed, I'm happy to provide it, he offered. Thank you, Captain Jackson, Solomon replied. Your intervention is already noted and appreciated. As they moved through the terminal toward the private room, Jasmine became acutely aware of the media presence. Reporters called out questions, cameras flashed, but airline security kept them at a distance. In the privacy of the conference room, Solomon's composed facade cracked slightly. Jasmine, when I got that call. He shook his head, unable to complete the thought. I know, Dad, she said softly. But imagine getting that call and not having a father who runs the airline. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide between speaking up or staying silent when witnessing discrimination? Comment number 1 if you believe more people should speak up like Tyrone and Gloria did, or number 2 if you think it's too risky in today's world. And what do you think Solomon Williams should do about this incident that's now gone viral? Don't forget to like this video if you want to see more stories about standing up against discrimination. Let's continue with what happened next. Solomon nodded gravely. The PR team has prepared a statement about an isolated incident and one employee's actions not reflecting company values. Standard damage control. Jasmine's expression hardened. That's exactly what I was afraid of. What do you mean? Dad, this wasn't isolated. It's systematic. She opened her journal, showing him page after page of documented incidents across multiple flights. I've been tracking patterns for months. Rebecca Whitley isn't an anomaly. She's a symptom. The door opened as the Airline executive team filed in. 6 people, 5 of them white men in nearly identical suits. The lone woman, Vanessa Chen, was the recently hired chief diversity officer, whom Solomon had brought on despite board resistance. Mr. Williams, began Charles Hartman, the chief operations officer. We have the situation contained. Ms. Whitley has been suspended pending investigation, and we've prepared a statement emphasizing our zero-tolerance policy. Charles, Solomon Assam interrupted. My daughter was physically assaulted by our employee because of her race and religion, in full view of dozens of witnesses, with multiple videos already viral on social media. This situation is not contained. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. We recommend an immediate press conference, said Michael Brennan, the PR director. You and Jasmine presenting a united front, emphasizing this was an isolated... It wasn't isolated, Jasmine interjected quietly. All eyes turned to her. I have documentation of 17 similar incidents across Airline flights in the past 3 months alone. Less severe, perhaps, but following the exact same pattern of discriminatory treatment. With all due respect, Ms. Williams, Hartman said with forced patience, you're a college student, not an airline professional. What you perceive as discrimination might simply be standard security procedures. Jasmine met his gaze evenly. I'm an engineering student who understands statistical analysis. When random selection consistently targets passengers of specific demographics at rates exponentially higher than statistical probability would support, that's not perception. That's mathematical evidence of bias. Vanessa Chen leaned forward, with interest. I'd like to see this documentation. Solomon nodded. As would I. He turned to Brennan. Hold the press conference. This requires more than a quick statement. Outside, the media presence had grown. Videos of the incident had reached major networks, with commentators already debating the broader implications for air travel, religious freedom, and racial profiling. When Jasmine and Solomon finally emerged for the hastily arranged press conference, they were met with a barrage of questions. Mr. Williams, will you fire the flight attendant? Jasmine, how does it feel to be discriminated against by your father's company? Is this incident indicative of a larger problem at Airline? Solomon raised his hands for silence. Before we take questions, I want to make a statement. The crowd quieted, cameras focused on father and daughter. Today, an Airline employee violated our most fundamental values by discriminating against and physically assaulting a passenger. That this passenger happens to be my daughter does not make this incident more important. It simply makes it more visible. He paused, glancing at Jasmine, who nodded encouragingly. I founded this airline 25 years ago with a promise that all passengers would be treated with equal dignity and respect. Today we failed to keep that promise. For that, I take personal responsibility." Reporters scribbled furiously as Solomon continued. "While it would be convenient to frame this as one employee's isolated actions, my daughter has presented compelling evidence that the problem may be more pervasive. Therefore, effective immediately, Airline is launching a comprehensive review of our training, policies, and practices regarding passenger treatment." Jasmine stepped forward to the microphone. "I don't want to be known as the CEO's daughter victim. What happened to me today happens to people without powerful connections every day. The only difference is that they don't have the platform I do to demand change." A reporter called out, "Jasmine, will you be filing charges against the flight attendant?" She took a deep breath before answering. "My concern isn't punishing one individual, but fixing a broken system. I'm more interested in structural solutions than personal retribution." As the questions continued, Solomon observed his daughter with newfound respect. The young woman handling reporters with poise and articulating complex issues with clarity was not the same undergraduate student he'd seen off to college. Adversity had revealed something in Jasmine that perhaps they both had missed. She was a natural leader. What neither of them realized as they managed the immediate aftermath was that this was only the beginning. The viral videos had struck a chord, becoming a catalyst for thousands of others to share similar experiences. By nightfall, your aerolite discrimination had evolved into flying while black and hijab on board, sparking a national conversation about discrimination in air travel that would prove impossible to contain with standard corporate damage control. Back at Airline headquarters, executives scrambled to assess the scope of the PR disaster unfolding across social media. What they failed to understand was that this wasn't merely a crisis to be managed. It was a reckoning long overdue. 3 days after the incident, Solomon Williams sat at the head of the Airline boardroom table, exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. Sleep had been scarce since the video went viral, now exceeding 50 million views across platforms. Around the table, board members and executives projected varying degrees of concern and irritation. Charles Hartman, the COO, slid a document across the polished surface. "Our legal team has prepared a settlement offer for Jasmine," he explained. $2 million, conditional on a non-disclosure agreement and agreement not to pursue further action. Standard language, generous terms. Solomon stared at the document without touching it. "Have you presented this to Jasmine?" "We thought it best coming from you," Hartman replied. Solomon's laugh held no humor. "Then you don't know my daughter very well." The boardroom door opened and Jasmine entered, followed by Vanessa Chen. Both women carried thick binders. "Thank you for joining us," Solomon said formally, aware of the board members' scrutiny. Since the incident, he'd been walking a precarious line between his role as CEO and his position as Jasmine's father. "We've completed our preliminary review," Vanessa announced, distributing executive summaries from her binder. "The findings are concerning." Board members flipped through the documents with growing discomfort. "This can't be accurate," protested Richard Mercer, the longest-serving board member. "These complaint numbers are actually underreported," Jasmine interjected. "Many passengers don't file formal complaints because they don't believe anything will change. The data shows a clear pattern of escalating incidents over the past 18 months. "Ms. Williams," Hartman said with strained patience, "with all due respect, you're not an airline executive." "No," she agreed. "I'm an engineer who understands data analysis, and this data tells a very clear story." She opened her own binder, revealing meticulously organized charts and testimonials. Rebecca Whitley has had 12 complaints filed against her by minority passengers over 5 years. All were dismissed as misunderstandings or necessary security measures. Not once was she disciplined or retrained. The more troubling pattern, Vanessa added, is that Rebecca is merely the most extreme example. We've identified 27 employees with similar complaint patterns, all protected by mid-level managers who buried the reports. Solomon's expression darkened. "Why wasn't I informed of this?" Hartman shifted uncomfortably. "These operational matters rarely reach the executive level. Standard procedure is to handle them within the service department." "Discrimination isn't An operational matter, Solomon said flatly. Richard Mercer cleared his throat. This is precisely why we've prepared the settlement offer. Resolve this quickly, implement some sensitivity training, and move forward. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. You want to pay me to be quiet so nothing actually changes? We want to resolve this efficiently, Mercer countered. Your father built this airline from nothing. Surely you don't want to damage his legacy with prolonged negative publicity. My father built this airline with a promise of dignity for all passengers, Jasmine replied. I'm trying to restore that legacy, not damage it. Solomon studied the settlement document, then deliberately pushed it away. My daughter is right. This isn't about one incident or one employee, and it won't be resolved with money. What exactly are you proposing? Asked Patricia Goldman, the only other woman on the board. Jasmine pulled out a detailed proposal document, a comprehensive anti-discrimination action plan, not just training, but structural changes in hiring, promotion, complaint processing, and accountability measures. The board members exchanged glances as they reviewed the extensive recommendations. This would cost millions to implement, Hartman objected. The viral video has already cost us more than that in market value, Patricia pointed out. Our stock dropped 12% yesterday alone. Because we're mishandling the response, Mercer insisted. We need to put this behind us, not prolong it with years of internal restructuring. Solomon stood up slowly, commanding the room's attention. When I started this airline, I was often the only black person in rooms like this. I told myself that once I had power, I would ensure others wouldn't face the discrimination I did. He paused, shame evident in his expression. Somewhere along the way, I started believing my presence at the top meant the problem was solved. I was wrong. The room fell silent as he continued. Jasmine's proposal will be implemented in full. This isn't up for debate. Mercer's face reddened. Solomon, the board needs to vote on any initiative of this magnitude. Then call the vote, Solomon challenged. This is an emotional reaction to your daughter's experience, Hartman argued. We need to approach this strategically. My daughter's experience opened my eyes to what's happening in my company, Solomon interrupted. But make no mistake, this is a strategic decision. Our brand was built on respect and inclusion. We've compromised those values, and it's costing us customers, talent, and now market value. The tension in the room was palpable as board members calculated their positions. Several looked poised to side with Mercer against the proposal. Before you vote, Jasmine said quietly, you should know that I've been contacted by 63 Airline passengers who experience similar discrimination. They're prepared to join a class action lawsuit if systematic changes aren't implemented. The threat of legal action shifted the atmosphere immediately. Additionally, she continued, my classmates at Howard University have organized a nationwide boycott of Airline, which already has over 200,000 pledged participants on social media. Patricia Goldman nodded with reluctant respect. She's leveraging her position effectively. We should listen. Over the next hour, the board debated the proposal, eventually agreeing to a modified version of Jasmine's plan. As they filed out, Mercer stopped beside Solomon. The board will be watching this closely, he warned. If this experiment fails, your position could be at risk. Noted, Solomon replied coolly. When only Solomon, Jasmine, and Vanessa remained, Jasmine sank into a chair, the strain of the confrontation finally showing. You didn't tell me about the lawsuit threat, Solomon said. I didn't want to put you in a more difficult position, she explained. But it's real. The attorney contacted me this morning. Solomon nodded thoughtfully. You know, when I started this airline, I faced a board very much like the one today. They told me my vision for an inclusive airline was naive idealism that would never work in the real world. What did you do? Jasmine asked. Solomon smiled slightly. I reminded them that the real world includes billions of people who look more like me than them, and they were leaving money on the table. Jasmine laughed despite her exhaustion. Always the businessman. The business case for doing the right thing is often stronger than people realize, he replied. But I've learned something important from you this week, Jasmine. What's that? That sometimes you need to do the right thing simply because it's right, regardless of the business case. As they gathered their materials to leave, Solomon's assistant entered with an urgent message. Sir, Rebecca Whitley is giving a live interview on national news. She's claiming she was following company training and that she's being scapegoated. Solomon and Jasmine exchanged glances. It seems our work is just beginning, he said. Neither could have predicted how their personal family crisis would soon catalyze an industry-wide reckoning that would extend far beyond Airline's boardroom. 2 weeks after the incident, Jasmine sat in her father's home office, surrounded by stacks of reports, policy documents, and news articles. Outside, a small group of protesters had gathered at the gates of their Atlanta estate, though it was unclear whether they were supporting Jasmine or Rebecca Whitley, who had become an unlikely champion for those claiming reverse discrimination and cancel culture. The board meeting starts in an hour, Solomon said, straightening his tie. Are you sure you want to present this yourself? Jasmine nodded, reviewing her proposal one final time. The Williams Protocol represented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination framework ever proposed for the airline industry, extending far beyond sensitivity training to include structural changes in hiring, promotion, complaint handling, and accountability measures. The board is divided, Solomon warned. Mercer has been rallying votes against it, claiming it's too expensive and disruptive. Then I'll need to make the business case alongside the moral one, Jasmine replied, thinking like her father's daughter. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Rebecca Whitley's tearful press conference was trending nationwide. Clicking the link, they watched as Rebecca dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I've dedicated 15 years to passenger safety, she said, voice breaking. Now I'm being sacrificed to political correctness because I followed my training when a passenger raised security concerns. Solomon shook his head in disgust. She's reading directly from a script our competitors provided. This has their fingerprints all over it. The doorbell rang, and Solomon's assistant showed in Tyrone Jackson and Vanessa Chen. Both had become key allies in developing the Williams Protocol. Rebecca's performance is convincing, Tyrone observed grimly. The pilot forums are split 50-50 on whether she's being unfairly targeted. We've completed the background investigation, Vanessa added, handing Jasmine a folder. It's worse than we thought. 23 formal complaints against Rebecca over her career, all from passengers, of color, all buried by her supervisors. Jasmine scanned the documents, her expression hardening. They knew. They've always known. There's more, Vanessa continued. We found internal emails showing mid-level managers were incentivized to minimize complaint statistics by reclassifying discrimination reports as customer service misunderstandings. Who authorized that policy? Solomon demanded. Vanessa hesitated. The directive came from the board, Solomon. 5 years ago. You were traveling during that meeting. Solomon fell silent, the weight of his own unwitting complicity settling on his shoulders. While he'd been building the airline, others had been systematically undermining its founding values, right under his nose. This changes the board presentation, Jasmine said finally. We're not just proposing new policies, we're exposing a cover-up. The significance of this approach wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Exposing board members' knowledge of discrimination wouldn't just force acceptance of the Williams Protocol, it could trigger resignations and potentially shareholder lawsuits. Jasmine, Solomon said quietly, if we take this approach, I'll likely lose my position as CEO. Mercer and his allies won't forgive this. She met her father's gaze. Would you rather keep your position or your principles? Before he could answer, Jasmine's phone rang. The caller ID showed Howard University. Professor Washington, she answered, putting the call on speaker. Jasmine, I'm calling about something unexpected, her engineering professor said. I've been contacted by Amina Williams Memorial Foundation. They found your mother's journals in their archives. Jasmine froze. Her mother had been dead for 7 years, but her foundation continued her advocacy work. What journals? She asked. Travel diaries, Professor Washington explained. From 1992 to 1996, when she was flying frequently for her human rights work. They're full of documented incidents of discrimination she faced on airlines, including early Airline flights. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "My mother experienced this on Dad's airline," Jasmine whispered. "The entries suggest she never told your father, not wanting to discourage him from his dream. But she documented everything, hoping someday the evidence might create change." After the call ended, Solomon sat heavily in his chair. "I founded Airline because Amina faced discrimination on other airlines. I never knew. She was protecting me from knowing it continued on my own flights." Jasmine touched her hijab, the connection to her mother's heritage that had triggered Rebecca's discrimination. She was gathering evidence just like I was, 25 years apart fighting the same battle. Something shifted in Solomon's expression. "The board meeting starts in 40 minutes. I think it's time for both Williams' generations to finish what Amina started." The Airline boardroom buzzed with tension as board members took their seats. News of Rebecca's press conference had created additional pressure, with major shareholders calling board members directly to express concerns about the company's direction. When Solomon entered with Jasmine, Tyrone, and Vanessa, several board members visibly stiffened. "This is an executive session," Mercer objected. "Captain Jackson and Ms. Williams have no standing here." "They're here at my invitation," Solomon replied coolly. "And after you hear what we've discovered, you'll understand why." Over the next 30 minutes, Jasmine presented not just the Williams protocol, but the evidence of systematic cover-up of discrimination complaints. As board members reviewed the damning emails, many copied to their own accounts, the atmosphere shifted from hostility to defensive silence. If these documents became public, Jasmine concluded, the company's liability would be catastrophic. The Williams protocol isn't just the right thing to do, it's the only thing that might save Airline from class action destruction. Mercer, face flushed with anger, slammed his hand on the table. "This is blackmail. You're threatening your father's own company." "No," Jasmine corrected. "I'm saving my father's company from those who corrupted its founding values." Solomon stood. "I move to adopt the Williams protocol in full, effective immediately. I further move to establish an independent oversight committee with full authority to implement these changes across all departments." Patricia Goldman seconded the motion immediately. Other board members, seeing the evidence against them, reluctantly joined. Mercer, seeing his position crumbling, played his final card. "Solomon, if this passes, I'll call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership. You're putting your daughter's crusade above shareholder value." Solomon smiled thinly. "Richard, my daughter just saved this company from billions in potential liability. But more importantly, she reminded me why I started it." He looked around the table. "Anyone who votes against this is welcome to explain to shareholders and the public why they preferred covering up discrimination to addressing it." The vote was unanimous. As they left the boardroom, Tyrone turned to Jasmine. "This is just the beginning. Implementation will face resistance at every level." "I know," she replied. "That's why I've deferred my next semester at Howard. I'll be working with the implementation team full-time." Solomon raised an eyebrow. "You never mentioned that." "I made the decision this morning," Jasmine explained, "when I realized this isn't just about one incident or one airline. Mom started gathering evidence 25 years ago. I can't walk away until her work is finished." As they reached the lobby, they saw the news playing on the large screen. Rebecca Whitley was now calling for industry-wide security protocols to protect flight attendants from accusations of discrimination. "She's still trying to reframe this as security versus religion," Vanessa observed. Jasmine watched the screen thoughtfully. "She believes what she's saying. That's the most dangerous part. Discrimination hiding behind security concerns seems reasonable to many people." "So what's next?" Tyrone asked. Jasmine squared her shoulders, looking remarkably like her father in that moment of determination. "Congressional testimony," she said simply. "It's time to take this conversation national." What none of them could have predicted was how quickly that conversation would transform not just one airline, but an entire industry's approach to the dignity of all passengers. 1 year later, Jasmine Williams stood in Terminal C of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, observing the bustling crowds with practiced attention. As executive director of Airline's new Passenger Dignity and Equality division, she had developed an eye for the subtle interactions between airline staff and diverse passengers. What she saw today filled her with cautious optimism. At the security checkpoint, a Sikh man in a turban was being screened with efficiency and respect. A flight attendant was assisting an elderly woman in a wheelchair with genuine warmth rather than performative courtesy. A Muslim family with young children was boarding without the extra scrutiny that had once been routine. Small changes, but meaningful ones. "Impressive improvements," said a familiar voice behind her. Jasmine turned to find Rebecca Whitley, dressed, not in an Airline uniform but in business casual attire. After her termination, Rebecca had eventually stopped fighting and started listening, a transformation that had surprised everyone, Jasmine most of all. "The cultural shift is happening," Jasmine agreed cautiously, slowly but measurably. Following 6 months of unemployment and public scrutiny, Rebecca had reached out to Jasmine directly, requesting a conversation that neither woman had expected to have. That painful but honest dialogue had led to Rebecca's current role, working with the implementation team as a consultant on what not to do and why previous approaches had failed. "The new flight attendant training program launches next week," Rebecca said. "My section on recognizing unconscious bias in security assessments is ready." Jasmine nodded, still maintaining professional distance. Their working relationship remained complicated. Reconciliation wasn't the goal, but effective change was. "The Williams Protocol implementation report goes to Congress next month," Jasmine informed her. "Your insights on resistance points among senior crew have been valuable." Rebecca's expression remained serious. "I still receive messages from flight attendants who think I was right to do what I did. The work isn't done." "It never will be completely done," Jasmine acknowledged, "but it's progressing." Over the terminal speaker, a boarding announcement called for Airline Flight 1857 to Washington, the same flight number as the incident. A year earlier, now used for Jasmine's regular commute between Airline headquarters and Capitol Hill, where she frequently testified on aviation equality standards. As Jasmine prepared to board, her phone buzzed with a message from her father. Solomon Williams was no longer Airlite's CEO. He had stepped down 6 months after the incident, recognizing that new leadership was needed to fully implement the changes. Instead, he had taken on the role of Industry Accountability Officer, working with a coalition of airlines to standardize anti-discrimination practices. "DC tomorrow," his message read. 7 airlines now adopting full Williams Protocol standards. Progress. Jasmine smiled slightly, though no longer running his company. Her father seemed more fulfilled advancing the values that had inspired him to start Airline in the first place. Boarding the aircraft, Jasmine noted the subtle changes implemented over the past year. Flight attendants now wore small pins indicating languages spoken and cultural sensitivity training completed. The safety briefing included a clear statement about respect for all passengers. Most importantly, the crew demographics reflected the diversity of the passengers they served. Taking her seat in economy, she still refused the first-class seat that was always available to her. Jasmine found herself sitting beside a young woman in a hijab who looked nervously around the cabin. "First flight?" Jasmine asked gently. The woman nodded. "I've been avoiding flying, after everything in the news about Muslims on planes." "Things are changing," Jasmine assured her. "Not perfectly, not everywhere, but they're changing." The lead flight attendant approached their row, greeting both women with equal courtesy. Jasmine recognized her. Gloria's granddaughter Tanya, part of the new generation of crew members hired under the Williams Protocol's expanded recruitment initiative. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Jasmine reflected on the journey of the past year. The Williams Protocol had expanded beyond Airline to become an industry benchmark, with 7 major airlines now implementing its standards. The congressional hearings had led to new federal guidelines for religious accommodation in air travel. Most significantly, passenger complaint data, now transparently tracked and published, showed a 30% decrease in reported discrimination incidents. Not victory, but progress. Midway through the flight, Jasmine opened her laptop to review the latest implementation data. The screensaver was a photo of her mother, Amina, whose travel journals had become foundational evidence in developing the protocol. Beside her laptop lay the engineering textbooks for the degree she was still pursuing, now with a focus on designing more inclusive aircraft cabin environments. The young woman beside her noticed the photo. "Is that your mother? She looks like you." "Yes," Jasmine replied. "She started the work I'm continuing." As the plane began its descent into Washington, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Jasmine recognized Tyrone Jackson, now promoted to chief pilot and head of flight crew training. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington, D.C. On behalf of all of us at Airline, I want to thank you for flying with us today. We're committed to providing a respectful, dignified travel experience for every passenger on every flight." What had once been a corporate platitude had become, through painful progress and ongoing vigilance, closer to reality. When the plane touched down, Jasmine remained seated as other passengers deplaned, using the moment of transition to center herself for tomorrow's congressional testimony. The journey wasn't over, perhaps it never would be completely finished. But watching the diverse stream of passengers moving confidently through the cabin, she felt something her mother's journals had often mentioned hoping for: the quiet dignity of ordinary travel, available to everyone. As she finally rose to deplane, Jasmine straightened her hijab, the same one she had quickly put on after Rebecca tore off her first one a year ago. Once a target that had made her vulnerable, it now represented the strength she had found in standing up not just for herself, but for countless others. Tomorrow's testimony would push for making the Williams Protocol federal regulation. The day after, she would return to her engineering studies, and the day after that, the work would continue, one flight, one policy, one mind at a time. This powerful story teaches us that systemic discrimination often persists because good people remain silent. Jasmine's journey shows that meaningful change requires more than just identifying problems. It demands courage to confront uncomfortable truths, even when they implicate people and institutions we respect. True leadership means acknowledging blind spots and working to correct them, as Solomon did when facing his company's failings. The Williams Protocol became effective not just because it implemented new rules, but because it created accountability and transparency at every level. Similarly, Rebecca's transformation reminds us that people can grow when they stop defending their actions and start listening to experiences different from their own. Perhaps most importantly, Jasmine's decision to use her privilege to uplift others rather than simply protect herself exemplifies how power should be wielded, not as a shield for personal comfort, but as a tool to create justice for everyone. Change rarely comes from top-down mandates alone. It requires both institutional commitment and individual courage from people at every level willing to speak up when they witness discrimination. Have you ever had to stand up against discrimination in your daily life? What gave you the courage to speak out? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories that challenge and inspire. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to use their voice against injustice. Your engagement helps amplify these crucial conversations. Thank you for watching, and remember, when we refuse to accept discrimination as normal, we create space for dignity to flourish for everyone.